What if your private practice was a space for your healing and growth too? What if we could move our practices from a stress-driven business model to a practice that grows as we thrive? What if we become courageous leaders and agents of change through our practices? Join us as we explore the journeys of inspiring psychologists who are healing through private practice. Hello, and welcome to season 2 of the Inspiring Psychologists podcast, where we are breaking the mold of private practice. This season is focused on the topic of healing through private practice. And I wanted to take the opportunity to introduce this topic before we get into the episodes of the series to help you understand where I'm coming from in this series and why I would choose to focus on a topic like how our experience of private practice can also be a healing space for ourselves. We know that private practice can be challenging, right? And so often we hear people talk about private practice and the challenges of private practice because, we think that we're missing skills in terms of business. And, we know that that can make private practice feel like a really destabilizing experience. Do we have the skills and competencies to do some of the basics? And I get that. There are definitely things that we need to continue learning about running a private practice that are related to those business skills, that business know how. But what I have experienced myself and what I've then witnessed many psychologists and therapists experience as well is that private practice can be one of the most emotionally confronting ways of working. And not just because of the kind of work that we do, not just because of the content of our work, but also, fundamentally, when we think about private practice, what we end up realizing is the main person, if you like, getting in the way of success or whatever that success is for us is ourselves. We are both the main enabler and main kind of source of empowerment, but we're also the person that where we struggle with our own obstacles. And that in itself is very confronting and very frustrating and brings up lots of things. So I know that I went into private practice partly because I was getting away from toxic work experiences. And so private practice was a place for me to create an environment for myself so that I could start to feel safe, that I could balance my life, that I could live according to my values. Um, and so, I kind of I imagined that it was probably just me who was doing that. Definitely 20 whatever years ago when I first started my private practice, I kind of felt alone in that. I knew I wasn't going into business just because I had some kind of amazing business idea and it was all going to be, this pure kind of course um, of self actualization. It was there to kind of fix some particular problems that I'd experienced in my work life. In order to kind of grow my practice, I know that I also then had to go on a big growth journey. And I think that continues. I still find ways in which I'm healing from and overcoming past learning and past experiences. What took me a while to kind of recognize, though, was um, when I started working with psychologists and therapists in private practice. And because I work with them over a long period of time, I think that's the other thing that kind of came into this mix. People come into our Practice Accelerator program for 10 months, and it's an extended period of time because initially we started out at 6 months and people were saying at 6 months, I'm not ready to leave. I've still got so much growing and I still need this support to continue evolving. And so you could tell there was a deeper developmental and even healing process that was going on. And then obviously, people stay in our community long term. And so, now we're coming up to people who are in the Accelerator alumni community who've been there for 6 and 7 years. And you continue to see how they are evolving and how they are growing and how they're uncovering um, aspects of their life and their learning and their own ways of seeing the world that have been, that are kind of in IFS terminology, we would call them burdens. They're still unpacking some of those burdens and letting go of some of those burdens and still kind of growing and evolving. So I realized that um, the foundation of an inspiring practice is this healing process, this healing experience that we have when we create a place for ourselves in the world, when we come home to ourselves, create a sense of safety for ourselves, and create a place where we can continue to evolve. And we do that for ourselves as well as doing it for other people through our practices. So for me, that's an ongoing journey. I think it comes back to also another aspect, which is really important, something else that I've realized that I think a lot of people don't talk about, which is that there is a fundamental difference between having a practice and having a business. A lot of our business models, a lot of business thinking, a lot of business learning is based on the premise that a business is separate from yourself, that it is, and that is also a legal entity that you might sell in future. So a lot of, business models are based on creating this business as ultimately a kind of product that you can sell on. And if we contrast that with a practice, when we really come back to what it means to have a practice, to be a practitioner of the profession of psychology or psychotherapy, there's a lot more about the development of our identity, the development of a series of practices. Yes, there are aspects of our profession being a vocation, even though we're earning our living through it. Um, but also, many of us do not have a mind that at some point this is an entity that will be separate from us that we will ultimately sell. And so our private practices are actually lifelong spaces that we create for ourselves. And I want us I want to really kind of reflect on and bring home how much of a fundamental difference that is. We are creating a practice that is also an expression of ourselves and our life journey. So yeah, there's a deeper connection with how we show up in the world through a practice, um, versus a business where some of the underpinning assumptions and models are that the business would be created as something that could then be sold separately. I also wanted to pick up on this topic of healing through practice because of a very um, illuminating conversation that I had with another psychologist. And it really comes down to this idea that, my experience was that I was alone in this experience, that I was alone in um, healing through my private practice. And then I, started to see that in my colleagues and the people that I was working with through um, our practice. And then I ended up having a conversation about this with an eminent clinical psychologist and, describing what I was seeing and kind of sharing that with them. And they said to me, I was kind of anticipating a degree of surprise or a degree of like, oh yeah, like illumination, that light coming on or something. But their response was even more surprising. They said, ah, yes, but that's what we don't talk about. And I was like, okay, what do you mean by that? We don't talk about it. And, they said to me, well, the fundamental underpinning of our practice as a psychologist is that we are meant to be the ones doing the healing. Like we're delivering the healing to other people. And that means that acknowledging publicly and speaking publicly about our experience of healing through this practice of psychology can actually be a sign of weakness, something you should be kind of fixing and getting away from. Is it why are we talking about this as integral to the practice of being a psychologist? And some of the teaching around that includes, therefore, our experiencing our own healing through our practices as being something that is a source of shame. Like, there is an element of shame that comes into the experience of being a wounded healer and uncovering layers of that as we then go through our practices and find things that we still need to heal in ourselves. So there is a kind of culture of not talking about this. And I can't be doing with that. you know, that shame flourishes in darkness. We when we experience something that we feel as though we can't talk about, that is itself a source of shame. So it felt really important to me because of all of these aspects to really open up a conversation about the multiple facets of ways in which private practice can be emotionally confronting, the ways in which it challenges us, the ways in which it exposes the things that, the areas where we have been wounded, where we have picked up burdens, where we have developed or embodied extreme kind of beliefs about ourselves or our profession or about the world. Private practice has a way of kind of exposing or bringing to the surface or surfacing that, I guess, because it becomes a space where we can also grow, and therefore, the healing and the growth maybe aren't going in. It's not that we have to heal first before we grow, but that they're simultaneous kind of processes. What I also notice is that when we go through this kind of healing process through our private practice, and we really connect with those experiences that have led us to a place of being able to, create safety for ourselves and then find those wounds, find those parts of ourselves that have felt exiled, exposed, shamed, etc. And we can do some of our own, or we experience some of our own healing. This starts to feed into developing a sense of purpose through our practice, that our practice itself becomes more purpose driven. And then what I see that evolving towards, and what I observe in so many of the people that we work with, is that it leads to courageous leadership on a topic. You know, one of our practitioners said to me recently that they had been kind of reviewing and kind of getting an impression of who are the people that we work with and, how have their practices evolved over time. And they made this really astute observation, which I just love because, you know, sometimes being so close to the work you do with people, you don't always kind of see these or make these insights. But they said to me, what I noticed about everybody that works with you is that they are practitioners who have a social mission. They're practitioners who want to see a change in the world. They're practitioners who have clarity on what differences they want to make and why they want to make those differences. And that just, it made so much sense to me then. I know that there is a progression somehow in between or from healing through our practice, developing purpose, and then moving into that more courageous leadership space. And we kind of built that into the accelerator program. And what that means for me is that when it comes to the topic of breaking the mold of private practice, we're not just doing it for the sake of it. We're not just there to be people who rock the boat for the sake of creating chaos. What's happening is through that process, we are coming into connection with what needs to change in this world. And, of course, there's a diversity of views on what needs to change in the world, but it's coming from a place of being rooted in our values. So, our own healing as psychologists, as psychologists in private practice, is a fundamental part of, and a foundation for making a meaningful difference in the world. And I think that's a really important message to get out there because there are so many questions that are raised about our motivation for private practice, whether we're motivated by profit, whether we're motivated by, fame and social media likes and engagement. And actually, what I see is that we're often very motivated by creating safety for ourselves. And then we become very motivated by the change we want to see in the world. And we do that from a place of safety within our practices that we've created for ourselves. So, that to me means that private practice can be a very empowering and powerful place to be as well. Ultimately, what this leads to for me is the conclusion that private practice can be a way of embodying the change that we want to see. If we want to see a world where there's less conflict, if we want to see a world where there is more peace and contentment, if we want to see a world where there is safety for others, safety for people, where people can thrive, where they can flourish, where they can live meaningful, balanced lives, where they can live in connection with community, where they can have their needs met. All of those things are what we can build into our private practice for ourselves first, and as a safe base for us then to support people and communities and organizations and society around us in also having some of that. So in this series, we have lots of people coming together to describe their own healing journeys. And I think they're tremendously courageous conversations for us to have. These conversations are meant to be a starting point. I've not tried to create the perfect answer in each of these conversations. I've tried to create a conversation that is authentic, that isn't scripted, that is people sharing their authentic experiences and beliefs about us trying to come to an understanding or a shared understanding with some of our common experiences as well as what's different. And so I'd encourage you to kind of maybe think about what people are saying and reflect on that in yourself. Where do you see similarities? Where do you see differences? And I hope that this series can be a source of conversation between a wider community, maybe a community that crosses other borders, that breaks across more silos, um, and kind of inspires more people to think about private practice as, a place that has that kind of deeper expression of values, as opposed to private practice being the place where people go when they want to make a bunch of money. So I look forward to getting into the conversations with you, and I will see you in episode 1. Have you experienced a toxic workplace or felt drained, disillusioned, or isolated in your practice? Perhaps it's time to transform your professional journey. Our Practice Accelerator and coaching programs are crafted to help you create a thriving practice aligned with your well-being and values. If you're curious about what this could look like for you, visit our website and explore how we can support you in building a fulfilling and sustainable practice. You don't have to navigate this alone. Let's thrive together. Join us at inspiringpsych.com. That's inspiringpsych.com.